Hello everyone, good morning, and welcome to day number 3 of the StarCityGames.com New Jersey Invitational, the conclusion of Season 2 here on the SCG Tour, brought to you by the awesome people over at Ultimate Guard. I'm your host this morning for our pregame show, Cedric Phillips, and I am joined by my 3 esteemed colleagues, starting with number 1 to my left, it's Patrick Sullivan.
Good morning.
Are you ready for this thing?
I am ready. 8 players, 8 different decks.
Yep.
Some of the matchups will look like slightly souped up games of Standard. Some of the games will look like slightly powered down games of Legacy. It's modern in full effect, and I'm looking forward to a full day of it.
Matthias Hunt also joining us here this morning. How are you?
Good morning. We are up early and looking forward to, 8 different decks here. This is going to be great.
Who says modern isn't healthy, Ryan Overturf? This looks awesome, right?
It does look awesome, and I'm really happy for Eric Hawkins, good friend of mine, and some great names on the top 8 on top of that.
Seems like it was a long time coming for Eric, who's someone we're going to get to. Had an awesome year last year, came up a little short for the Players' Championship. Now in his first Invitational top 8 and might be heading to the Players' Championship this year, though he does have a difficult matchup in front of him against very skilled player in Michael Majors. But we will get there, I promise, because we're going to break down all of the matchups here in the quarterfinals. We'll be making predictions as well, but we want to talk about first and foremost what these players are playing for here this morning in the top 8 of an Invitational. You see first place, $10,000, 50 SCG points, an invite to one of our next Invitationals, the next one being in Atlanta in December. For the finalists, it's $5,000, 40 SCG points, an invite to that Invitational in Atlanta. At the very least, our players who do lose in the quarterfinals are out of here with $1,500, 30 SCG points to get Season 3 off to a great start, and an invite to one of our next Invitationals. But for first place, there is even more on the line. $10,000 and 50 SCG points is cool, but an invite to our Players' Championship, an invite to Pro Tour Kaladesh and Honolulu, buys and free entry to Opens, free entry to our Classics that take place on Sunday of Open weekends and Invitational weekends, and likeness on a token as well. So first place is a pretty big game, though I must say, gentlemen, and I'll start here with you, Patrick, people are having difficulty figuring out what token they want to be.
That's always the most contentious thing, right? It's very rare. Sometimes we have something like what happened last Invitational where the clue tokens are all around. That's a no-brainer, right? Yep. But barring those kind of special cases, it's kind of suited to taste, right?
Yeah, I think so. Now, Matthias, if you were winning this Invitational, what would you pick to be your token?
Well, the newest token, which we now have seen, and I think we've had at least one player answer this, if you've looked at the Commander set coming out, there's a token that's the Monarch token, yep. And I think just like making yourself the Monarch would have to be pretty sweet.
Ryan, anything line up for you as far as your likeness on a token if you won?
You kind of want one that's never been done before, maybe some we're going to see on camera. We might be seeing some 3-2 Eldrazi's in the future. That's an interesting choice. It'd also be really cool to see yourself Eldrazified. It'll lead to some really interesting artwork anyway, so I think that's a good pick.
I know a lot of people are kind of leaning towards the Monarch this weekend. We'll have to find out what it's going to be, though, for the winner. But let's start a little bit of a breakdown here on our first match. It's going to be Lucas Loyson, who is playing a Jeskai this weekend against Jadine Klomparent, who is on old Jund. Oh, Jund. Jund never loses, apparently. We got one in the top 8. Jadine, you're the bad guy, bad person this weekend. But as we take a look at the breakdown here, Patrick, I'm going to start with you. Who do you like in this matchup? What do you think that matters? Remember, it is 2 games pre-sideboard, 3 games post-sideboard.
So this is one of the matchups that will look kind of like a powered-up game of Standard. You have 3 color mid-range decks with a variety of card advantage, removal, and creatures going at it here. I think the battle is ultimately about card advantage, and that's where I think Lucas has a big edge in the matchup. Ancestral Visions, Nahiri, and Snapcaster Mage are all cards that Jadine doesn't answer that well and can provide a lot more advantage than anything that Jadine is bringing to the table. On top of that, remember the structure of this. We played 2 pre-forwarded games, and I think Jadine has a lot more dead weight in her main deck for this matchup than Lucas does.
Matthias, what do you see?
You know, kind of what Patrick was saying, this is, I guess, your 2 fair decks of the format squaring off against each other. Now, both players have used their sideboards to really orient themselves toward the combo decks, the unfair decks of the format, so it's going to be a lot about their main decks. No one's going to go much bigger out of the sideboard. This is actually pretty close in that what I like is that Jadine has really stayed on more traditional builds of Jund. She's not moving to Grim Flayers. She's playing a lot of those traditional value cards. This one's close, and I think while Jeskai has an edge, Jadine has been a long time coming in a big finish like this, and I think she can pull it out.
What do you think, Ryan?
Jadine is a very strong player, very skilled, though she's at a severe interaction deficit. Against Snapcaster Mage and Ancestral Recall, as soon as those are on the stack, she's just behind in terms of value. Her game plan is going to be to try to Thoughtseize Inquisition to Kozilek, get ahead of these, run over some games with Tarmogoyfs. Though the longer the game goes, I feel the more uphill the battle is going to be for JD, and I like the Jeskai deck in this matchup.
It seems like this is going to be a really close one. I wouldn't be surprised if this does go 5 games. I think how things have changed with 2 games pre-sideboard and 3 games post-sideboard, as you mentioned, does play a big role in things. However, I would argue as well for Lucas' side, he's got some pretty bad cards game 1 too. You know, now Nahiri will be able to solve that a little bit. Maybe Nahiri's the key to the matchup?
I think it's a big one. It's another source of card advantage, and it's a way of smoothing out some of the dead cards as you think. I think this is probably the most contentious matchup in terms of our analysis of it. I think Lucas is ahead by a lot.
Okay.
And I know that you and Matthias are both picking JD, and I think they have a slight edge in the matchup. So we'll just have to see how the games play out here. But I think Snapcaster Mage, Ancestral Visions, and Nahiri are so much better than anything that JD brings to the table that I think Lucas has a solid edge here.
What do you think kind of puts JD over the top maybe in the sideboard game? Is there anything that stands out to you? I mean, of course, Jund gets to get bad cards out, good cards in, but is there anything outside of just Jund being Jund?
Well, Jund is Jund, but the thing is, the thing that I think puts her ahead in the sideboard isn't necessarily on the deck list sheet. I mean, these games are going to go, what, 7, 10, 13 turns, and I think experience is the thing that'll put her ahead, and JD has a ton of it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Ryan, anything kind of jump out to you before we put a close on this one? I mean, it is kind of 2 modern stalwarts. Jeskai almost simply back because of Nahiri. Obviously, addition and Ancestral Vision's a card you know pretty well, as well as in the deck, and I know that plays a matchup in these kind of grindy matchups.
I do think that JD does have a pretty good sideboard package with Fulminator Mage specifically. She can cut Lucas off of actually being able to play the long game, in particular messing up Celestial Colonnade. That can really mess with his game plan, but as soon as these blue cards, the Ancestral Vision, the Snapcaster Mage, and even Nahiri, an honorary blue card, start getting on the stack, things look really good for Lucas.
Well, we will make our selections here in this matchup right now. I am picking JD Clomparens to win. I'm a believer in Jund for better or worse. I think that Jund is just good enough to get the job done here. There's not even words I can say. It's Jund. It's just Jund. It feels like it never loses. I'm not even saying what you're saying is incorrect. Ancestral Vision's tough to overcome. Nahiri, tough to overcome. Snapcaster Mage is a busted blue card. There are good sideboard cards here for Lucas as well, but at the end of the day, and maybe it doesn't even make a lot of sense, Jund just finds ways to get it done. So that's why I'm picking JD.
Well, Modern is a format full of sets where R&D did not yet know how to develop the blue cards.
Sure.
We know how good the blue cards are in mid-range matchups when they're super souped up. Lucas's deck has a ton of them, and I'm picking him.
Matthias?
Well, both decks here are great. I think one of the advantages to Jund, as you were saying, it's a great deck. Its matchups never drop really below 45% against anything. And I'm picking JD here as the player.
Ryan?
I love Snapcaster Mage.
You do?
Yeah, surprise. My pick for the most abstractly powerful card in Modern. Jund is the good stuff deck, and it doesn't have the best stuff in this matchup. I love Jeskai.
Well, we've got to have Nick Miller be our decider. Nick Miller is siding with the Jund army. He'll be selecting JD, so we will see if our prediction does come true. JD Clomparens is our pick overall to win, but we'll see if these blue cards, what are you doing?
All right, Snapcaster Mage is good enough that I have played with it. It's not close to okay.
Okay.
And in a game that's going to be long and a kind of a value fest, and who can play the attrition game better, give me Snapcaster Mage every time.
All right, this is the thing that's actually happening. He's picking blue cards instead of non-blue cards. Okay, fair enough. It must be early. You've had your coffee, right?
Several cups.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. We got our next matchup here. It is Brad Nelson, who has called this tournament a PCQ. Yes, a PCQ, a Players' Championship Qualifier, which means you have to win the tournament to get there. But he's deeming this a PCQ, and so far he's been right. Death Shadow Aggro is what he is on this weekend. He's against Miles Rodriguez, who is playing Burn. Miles, a more local player. A lot of players from New Jersey here know him, and everyone said he plays Burn in everything. And he played like a Burn deck in Standard. He played a Burn deck here in Modern, so he's into the top 8 with Burn. And we're not going to start with you, Patrick, believe it or not. We're going to start with Matthias. So we have a really aggressive deck where you want your life total to be low, and a deck that's really good at bringing your life total to be low. So what's going on here?
Okay, so this is one of the more interesting matchups in Modern because both players are trying to burn the same person.
Yes.
So there's this game where Miles wants to get Brad's life total low, but not too low. He's going to try to finish him off, in a end step, untap, sort of get him from 10 to 0 without giving Brad an attack. Overall, this still tends to be a matchup that's in Burn's favor, just because of the fact that Death Shadow is dealing a lot of damage, so really, Burn starts closer to the finish line every game. This is one of those matchups where I think Death Shadow aggro is this great combo deck, which really hasn't had a big finish on the tour yet. And I was thinking, with the hands of Brad Nelson, this could be the weekend for it. But it seems like every time we get it in the top 8, it just hits one of these matchups where it's really going to struggle. And I don't know, this is another one of them.
Ryan, how do you analyze this one? Because it's just a weird one.
When both players are trying to damage the same person, I have bad news for the match. One of them is wrong. If Brad doesn't have a Death Shadow, it's going to be Brad. That is his card in the matchup. And if you look at sideboards, typically you'll see 1 or 2 copies of Phyrexian Unlife for the Death Shadow player.
Okay.
And that would be huge in a 5-game set, but Brad doesn't have it this weekend. So he's really trying to draw to Death Shadow in literally every game of this match. So I think that Burn is fairly significantly advantaged.
Patrick, you're a Burn player. You're also a Zoo player. I know you don't have a lot of experience with Death Shadow Zoo. How do you analyze this? Because if you're a Burn player, I think they're just supposed to fire away and just keep burning them.
Well, the key to the matchup is Death Shadow. So when I was playing my Zoo list, I had Lightning Helix instead of Street Wraith and Gataxian Probe.
Oh, big difference.
And still felt I was behind a little bit in the Burn matchup. So I can't imagine it's very good. In the games where Brad has Death Shadow, it becomes a lot different, and then there's a lot of pressure on Miles to thread the needle. He can't get him down to 4 past the turn and hope that things are going to be okay. In those games, there's a lot of pressure then on Miles to cast his sorceries early on, so he can keep Brad's life total fairly high when Brad is in his main phase and go end of turn, here's a bunch of bolts, untap, here's a bunch of bolts.
Okay.
If Brad doesn't have Death Shadow, I just don't know how he gets enough traction in these games fast enough, given how much damage he's dealing to himself.
Now, it's funny, right? You think of Burn in other formats, maybe you think of it more as a metagame deck. In Modern, it's a real thing. You know, it's got good cards across the board. We're talking Goblin Guide, Eidolon the Great Revel, Monastery Swiftspear, Boros Charm, Searing Blaze, Atarka's Command, like all just good cards. They don't have to play any bad cards to facilitate anything. I guess you could say Lava Spike is bad, but not really in the context of the deck. Yep. So for this matchup, I don't really know how the games are supposed to play out, I suppose, in a fashion of, is Brad supposed to fetch, sack a fetch land, pay 2 life right away? Ryan, what do you think about that? Like, if he has Wild Ikatos, to just fetch, sack, play it, go to 17, or is it slow play the fetch lands?
Well, something about this matchup, all of those decisions are going to be extremely contextual. There's not going to be a cookie cutter recipe for I'm trying to Gataxian Probe, my opponent's trying to Lava Spike. You have to really reanalyze everything on every turn of every game. And in that kind of situation, Brad Nelson's going to shine. He's an excellent player, so these high contact matchups, that is going to help him. So I don't think you're going to see the same play patterns in every game. It's going to depend how many Street Wraiths he has, how many Gataxian Probes he has. I think you're going to see some tap shock lands, some untapped, and I think that Brad's going to be pretty good at finding the right windows.
Matthias, I'll ask you this, because there's some weird contextual questions I'm going to ask to each of you. Street Wraith, Gataxian Probe in Brad's deck, are they in after sideboard?
Well, that's really the interesting part, right? Because he doesn't play any blue mana. So when he has those in games 1 and 2, you're asking, can he prevent himself taking damage? Not really. One of the questions, what I would be looking at with Brad's sideboard is some of those are still going to be in. He doesn't have 8 reasonable cards to bring in, and also he needs to be able to fuel Become Immense and things like that in his graveyard. I would expect him to trim, in particular, on Street Wraith in this matchup. His deck doesn't actually ever cast the card, but Probe probably has to be in.
Patrick, in Miles' sideboard, and we already think it's pretty favorable, but in Miles' sideboard, there's a card called Deflecting Palm.
Yes.
Is there any beating that?
And Path to Exile is a problem too.
Yeah.
To speak to the question that you asked Ryan, I think Brad just has to go for it because he can't play a long game. It's a classic who's the beatdown kind of question.
Okay.
A place where Brad has the edge is on exactly the 3rd turn of the game. If he assembles Become Immense plus Temur Battle Rage or just has a good beatdown draw, he may be faster than Burn in a lot of those games, and it's hard for Miles to empty out his hand by the 3rd turn. So I think Brad has to leverage that as much as possible. But yeah, post-board, playing through Deflecting Palm and Path to Exile, Brad has no cards nearly as good contextually in the matchup, and Deflecting Palm especially is just something I think he's just going to have to ignore it. There's no way to work around it. I think he has a couple copies of Inquisition of Kozilek in the sideboard. Those can probably come in regardless, but Deflecting Palm is just, if it's there, it's going to be hard for Brad to win a lot of these games.
Well, we make our selections now, and for me, I'm picking Miles. It's more so about the cards. I think that Brad is the better player here. No offense to Miles, I mean, it's Brad Nelson. We all know what he's capable of. He's treating this as a one-off to get to the Players' Championship, and he's almost there. So he's almost kind of called his shot here, but I don't know how he's supposed to get by this. As skilled as he is, as crafty as he can be when playing a game of Magic, I don't know what he's supposed to do. It's so straightforward. If Miles is just going to keep firing the burn, and I don't think there's anything Brad can do that. And as you mentioned, Path and Deflecting Palm, it seems like too much to overcome.
Yep, too much action on the sideboard. I think the matchup fundamentally favors Miles anyway, and if you're asking me if I'm going to take the local burn player
from New Jersey
or someone else, any other human being on the planet, I'm going with the former every time.
Fair enough. Matthias.
So this is a high skill matchup. There's a lot of decisions to be made, and I've never been shy about picking Brad Nelson to win in bad matchups. He's a great player, and I really wanted to do that today until we got to 3 Deflecting Palms in the sideboard. And at that point, I just can't do it. It's going to be Miles.
Ryan, can you pick Brad?
I want to pick one more thing about the Deflecting Palm interaction. Death Shadow Teamer Battle Rage. If the first hit doesn't kill Brad and we see a palm there, the second hit might kill Miles.
Okay.
So that's a really interesting interaction. We'll see how that actually plays out in the matches. I do like Miles here, though.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to pick against Miles. Maybe Nick is going to go against the grain here. No, Nick is going to go against the grain. He's going to pick Brad Nelson. If Brad wins, it feels like an upset to me. I just don't know how he's going to be able to overcome all of this stuff. Game 1 seems pretty difficult, but winnable, but it hinges so much on him drawing Death Shadow to the point where we might see him mulligan to 5-4, because Nakado's good, Swiftspear's good, Steplinks is good, but I think it's got to be Death Shadow.
I think if Brad has an edge anywhere in the matchup, is his best draws are a lot better than Miles' best draws. When Brad's on the play and is ready to go on turn 3 and has Death Shadow, it takes a lot for Miles to be able to interact there. It basically involves Path to Exile in the post-board games. The pre-board games, of which we play 2, there's really no response to that.
Yep.
So if Brad is firing on all cylinders, he's got a shot to win these games, but doing that 3 times out of 5, especially with what Miles has in the sideboard, I think it's just asking too much.
Well, that's 2 matchups in the books. That's one side of the bracket. We're going to take a look at the other after we come back from this very quick commercial break.
SCG Tour offers a chance to test yourself and see how far you've come.
Every week you get to play a tournament that gives you a chance to prove yourself. You can use it as a metric to see if you're getting better or not, making your first day 2, making your first top 8, and even taking home your first trophy.
You just get to sort of see the country. Playing competitive Magic is what has allowed me to travel to all these different places, and it's been a really cool experience. SCG is very good at recognizing which players are up-and-coming stars. They're dedicating themselves to the tour. They will work with you to help you brand yourself, get your name out there, so that you can build yourself within the community and really turn this into something more than a hobby.
Playing in an invitational is the best you'll see anywhere in the States as far as the highest level of competition.
To win an invitational, you need not only the drive to succeed and the will to win, you also just need consistency. It's 16 rounds of 2 different formats, and you have to bring your A game every single round.
Making the Players' Championship takes a lot of dedication. It takes a commitment from yourself to understand you got to play in a lot of tournaments, and Magic's tough. There's variance, you can be playing really good, maybe you don't win the tournament that day, but you got to keep playing and playing and battling. Keep trying hard and you keep working, eventually you can come through.
It's the culmination of everything that I've been working for, basically. It is nice to put a lot of effort into something and see that effort be rewarded in some way.
I've had a great experience playing on the SCG Tour over the last few years, and it's something I would recommend to any aspiring Magic player looking to raise their level of play and grow their career in Magic.
Welcome back, everyone, to the StarCityGames.com New Jersey Invitational, the conclusion of Season 2 here on the SCG Tour. Cedric Phillips, Patrick Sullivan, Matthias on, and Ryan Overturf, breaking down what we think is going to happen here in the quarterfinals. Eventually, we'll be picking who we believe is going to be the winner of this whole tournament. As we had about 650 to start, we're down to 8. We're going to analyze just 2 right now. One of them is a Liam Lonergan. That's a mouthful, but he is playing a deck that I don't think we expected to see a lot of here this weekend. He is playing Elves, straightforward, bunch of green creatures, some Collected Companies, some Quarter Callings, rinse, repeat. The goal is to activate Azuri and attack for a whole bunch of damage, which this deck is fantastic at. On the other side of things, boy, he's tough to beat, Tom Ross. He wears a sign on his head like every tournament of here's the thing I'm doing, and just no one can stop him from doing it. Played Humans in Standard, played Dredge here in Modern. He played Dredge last weekend in Syracuse, so top 8 finish. He's here at it again. You know, he even said, normally he plays Infect, but he even said, I'm glad I didn't play Infect this week, and I'm glad I'm playing Dredge, though. Is this one of the times, and Ryan, I'm going to start with you, where he wishes he was playing Infect and not Dredge?
Almost certainly. In this matchup, both players are just trying to dump a bunch of stuff on the battlefield, and when it comes to raw damage output, Azuri Renegade Leader is the big find here. Not to mention that our Elves player is on the play, so they have more time to set up, get that on the table faster than Tom can set up, whereas Infect is a deck that can maybe have a turn 2, turn 3 kill. So I think that Tom kind of wishes that he was on Infect for this matchup.
Matthias, how does Dredge get an advantage in this very creature-oriented matchup?
Well, Dredge is going to have to be interactive because in the end of the day, this is a combo mirror in a sense. These are two unfair decks. And I would say Liam Lonergan's Elves deck is a little bit faster. Where Elves has always shined, we saw, when Eldrazi was good, Elves became good. When you get these decks that aren't really interacting but are turn 4, turn 5 decks, Elves is really great. Its downfall has been cards like Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile. So Tom's going to have to do his best impersonation of a control deck. Cards like Conflagrate are going to be very important to him to buy himself a turn to maybe race the Elves player.
Patrick, how do you feel this plays out? Is this kind of a walk-away here for Liam, at least in the pre-sideboard games?
I think he definitely has an edge here. There's no question about it. For me, if Tom can line up a removal spell profitably, he's got an edge because he has some inevitability here, and Liam's trying to cobble together mixing pieces, more so than Tom is. So a lot of pressure on Conflagrate, pre-board and post-board, possibly Dark Blast, possibly Abrupt Decay at a key moment for Tom in the post-board games. I think if it is just 2 ships passing in the night, Liam has an edge here just on the deck and the fact that he's on the play, but Tom does have the ability to interact a little bit more than Liam does, at least in the post-board games.
Some of the payoff cards here, Ryan, you think of the Dredge deck and why it's been so successful. We're looking at cards like Greater Gargadon, Bridge from Below, some of the hallmarks of this deck. Do those cards play a role? Are we going to see any Gargadon-based wins here?
Not Gargadon specifically. Maybe you could generate enough zombies to overpower the Elves board, go wider. Though the issue is Tom only has 2 bridges. That's really kind of a 4-bridge kind of plan, which Tom doesn't really have access to. The games Tom's winning are going to be things like turn 2 Collective Brutality, kill this elf, look at your hand, take your Court of Calling or your Collected Company, slow you down on that front. Maybe turn 1, Conflagrate for 0, turn 2 discard my hand, Plague Wind you, set up from there. But yeah, Tom is really looking at his interactive cards more than his actual proactive plan.
I think seems like it's going to be difficult. Matthias, anything in the sideboard kind of jump out to you? I know Tom has Dark Blast. It doesn't seem like Liam has much.
Yeah, Liam doesn't have too much because this is the matchup he was more or less looking for. We've seen some players go heavy on Graveyard Hate. Not for him today. You're right, Tom does have 2 copies of Dark Blast. He actually also has Abrupt Decays, which generally he uses to hit things like Graft Digger's Cages, but he'll take it here. As Ryan mentioned, he's not going to overpower Elves. They're too resilient for that. He's going to need some kill spells, and he'll take everyone he can get.
Well, my prediction here, as we will make our predictions, it's hard for me to pick against Tom Ross, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm actually picking Brad and Tom to lose, so I'm going to look stupid soon probably. But I don't really know how Tom's supposed to overcome this because it's just creatures on creatures, it feels like, more so than anything. Yes, there's a little bit of interaction on Tom's end. Maybe there's a little bit of interaction on Liam's end. But at the end of the day, I think that if we're just creatures on creatures, Liam does this better, and I think it speaks to your point, Matthias, and we'll get to you in just a second, about when Eldrazi was good earlier this year, Elves was something to go to because it was just creatures on creatures. So, Liam, you're going to beat maybe the best player in SCG Tour history. Patrick.
I think this matchup is within the margin of error. I think Liam does have an edge, 75 cards to 75 cards. I probably don't believe it's as significant as you believe it to be. And because it's within the margin of error, I'm going to go with Tom. Just going to pick the better player here.
Fair enough. Matthias, we go to you.
The matchup's pretty close. Tom might be the slower of the 2 decks, but he's got enough removal to play, where I think naturally, his deck will win about 2 games, so all that will have to happen for Tom to win the match is that he'll have to steal a game. I'll put Tom Ross on doing that.
Ryan?
Last weekend we saw Tom beat a turn 0 Leyline with Dredge, and if you're going to tell me that little green creatures is an insurmountable obstacle after that, I'm going to disagree, though I do think Liam is favored, and I'm going to pick him in this match.
Fair enough. We'll see what Nick Miller does decide as well. Nick Miller's going to go with the boss, Tom Ross, so it's 3-2 in favor of Tom, but I think this one is relatively close. It's going to be a fun one to watch, as will our final match. That will be enjoyable as well. Eric Hawkins, a good friend, some of our Minnesota friends up here, Matthias and Ryan, they know this gentleman pretty well, and Patrick, you and I got to know him pretty well over the past year. You saw him a lot on the SCG Tour, not so much this year, but when he has been here, he's been winning. We see him with Affinity here this weekend in the top 8 against Michael Majors, who is playing Obzon this weekend, a very different Obzon build, a deck I really wouldn't put Michael on since he's played so much Grixis over the past year. But when I look at this matchup, for me, it comes down to one card. I don't want to make it that simple, but when you're Affinity, you're playing against Obzon, you check the deck list for how many Lingering Souls, and there's Lingering Souls in Michael's deck list. Can Eric overcome that, Patrick?
I think so. I think if you had to ask me what's the closest matchup we have in the top 8, what is the matchup most likely to go the full 5 games, I would pick this one.
Okay.
Yes, Lingering Souls is problematic, but Affinity's best draws can play through that, and Michael also has a lot of, to be frank here, garbage in his deck game 1. Post-board is where Majors really gets an edge. He's bringing in anywhere from 8 to 10 cards, all of them high impact. I think Eric has to get the first 2 games to be able to win this matchup here. I think if Michael's even able to split the first 2, he's in a huge edge in the post-board games. But on the balance, I think the matchup is quite close.
Matthias, what do you think?
That's exactly it. So Affinity is a powerful enough deck that no matter how much hate you board in against it, when Eric has one of his very strong draws, he can still win the game. And this is kind of what Eric thinks of it too. If he can win the first 2, he says, I will, Majors then in games 3, 4, 5 will have to miss a land drop once. Eric will have to get a double Mox Opal hand and maybe he can steal it. You're right, Michael Majors was looking other directions in his main deck. We see 2 Nihil Spell Bombs in the main. This isn't for Affinity, but then we go to the sideboard and Hawkins would be, if Hawkins needs to get 2 of the post-board games, that is going to be very difficult.
It does seem tough post-sideboard for him, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about Lingering Souls in this matchup, one thing about it, it's more of a removal spell than anything. It just gets in the way. Eric does have 3 Etch Champions. So the Lingering Souls don't really clock Eric at a reasonable clip. If he's able to get an Etch Champion, maybe suit up a Cranial Plating, he can steal those games. He has the advantage of the play. Games 3, 4, and 5, he has to fade 2 copies of Stony Silence and a ton of more interaction when Michael's not drawing these Grim Flayers that are really mopey 2/2s, things like that. So he's got some real obstacles to overcome in the post-sideboard games, but if he's able to just have the very fast hand, cast my 2-drop on turn 1 or turn 2 off of Mox Opal, or just get Etch Champion online, he does have some advantages there.
Does Eric have to win the first 2 games to win this match? Can he split, or does he have to win the first 2?
If he splits the first 2, then he has to go 2-1 in post-board games. I don't want to say, actually, you know what? No, he has to win the first 2 games.
Patrick, how do you feel about that?
I mean, nothing's impossible. Mulligans can happen, all that stuff. But asking, again, Eric to win 2 out of the 3 games post-board, including a game on the draw, that's asking a lot. You're looking at that point at Eric either having his best possible hands or Michael mulliganing a bunch or his draw otherwise failing.
Ryan, your thoughts? Does he have to win the first 2, or can he split and he'll be able to get done?
Have to is really strong, but he sure wants to. If he's able to keep a clear head after splitting those first games, because it is really bad for him if those split.
Yeah.
But it's possible, but very improbable. He's really looking to clinch those first 2 games.
Well, we make our selections here, and I'm going to side with Michael Majors. I think that we're probably going to see him split the first 2. Lingering Souls will probably get him a game. Eric will probably win a game just because that's what Affinity does, especially pre-sideboarded. But to win 2 out of 3 post-board, I think it's going to be really tough. We're looking at Stony Silence, we're looking at Damnation, some more spot removal. Majors is able to get the bad cards out of his deck, the good cards in. I think this one probably does go 5, but I think Majors does win it 3 games to do.
Majors in 5, the exact same thing. I mean, I can easily imagine worlds where Hawkins is able to win this matchup. I can even see him winning in 3 or 4 games in some range of the draws here, but over the long haul, I would expect Majors to take this matchup in 5 games. Just the sideboard's too much.
Matthias?
Look, I don't want to take anything from Eric Hawkins. After missing the Players' Championship last year, he went runner-runner this weekend, never losing first place. He's the overall 1 seed. It's been a great tournament for him. But if you want to talk about another player who has a good finish that's a long time coming, that's going to be Michael Majors, and I think he's going to take it down.
To Ryan Overturf we go.
I like Michael Majors a lot. I'd like him more if he was playing Grixis. He's playing against my boy. Give me Eric Hawkins.
We'll see what Nick Miller has to say. He's going to go with Michael Majors as well. So Ryan is sticking with his boy. That is Eric Hawkins. We'll see how things do shake out there. That'll be part of our second quarterfinals that Matthias and Ryan will be covering. But we are just about set here. But on our way out the door, we've locked in 3 more spots to the Players' Championship. We already have 5 coming in. Now, Tom Ross is qualified. We know that. He's on top of the Season 2 points race. But if he wins this tournament, Todd Stevens is qualified. So we have a very sharp dresser who is a curious observer here this morning. You also see Kevin Jones and Andrew Jessup. Congratulations to all 3 of them. They'll be going to the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia for the Players' Championship December 17th and the 18th. Now we could see Tom slide up in that bigger picture and then we slide the people over and we had Todd Stevens. Or it'll be a fresh face. Maybe it will be Brad Nelson. But as we make our way and conclude this show, we have to pick a winner who we think is going to just win this thing overall. So I'm going to start down you with Ryan. We'll make it all the way over to me. Ryan, who's winning the New Jersey Invitational?
If we just look at a matter of deck lists and matchups across the bracket and in position, I think that Lucas Loyson is very well positioned here. I like the Jeskai control deck through the entire top 8, and I think that he is a small favorite to win this event.
Matthias, we go to you.
When we talk about black-green decks, we always talk about whether or not they picked the right sideboard. They get to pick their wins and they pick their losses, and I like no one's sideboard in that better than that of Michael Majors. He has all the right hate for these decks in the top 8. I think he's going to be our champion.
Patrick, to you.
The way the bracket looks like to me, I'm predicting Lucas Loyson versus Michael Majors in the finals with Lucas Loyson taking it down.
Well, I'm oddly enough with Matthias. I think that Michael Majors is going to get by Eric Hawkins in either 4 or 5 games. I think it's going to be a fun competitive match, but I think he's going to slide by that. I think he's going to end up playing Liam Lonergan in the semifinals, and I think he's got just enough good cards in his sideboard, Damnation being a huge one, of course, and enough discard to be able to interact there. I think he will play against Jeskai in the finals, and I think it's probably going to go the full 5, and I think Michael Majors are going to come out on top, and we're going to see the man with the great hair head to the Players' Championship. Those are our predictions here in the booth, but it is time to take a short break. Our players are filing in. We're going to get them set up in the feature match area, and then we're going to bring you the quarterfinals here in New Jersey. So, for Ryan Overturf, Matthias Hunt, and Patrick Sullivan, I am Cedric Phillips, and we will see you guys back here for the quarterfinals of our New Jersey Invitational in just a bit.
Join us on the SCG Tour